Three, two, one, zero. Ignition. Liftoff.
My name is Nick.
Hey, my name is Yuri. You're watching Moontower HQ.
Today's topic of discussion is going to be about Bitcoin and cash. And no, not Bitcoin Cash, because, well, that. And really how Bitcoin can become the cash of the future. I think it's important to take a step back and look at where the entire ecosystem has been heading over in terms of cashless payments over the last maybe 10 or 15 years. Originally, before even kind of Bitcoin came on the scene, there was already a precedence in a lot of the European countries, Canada to some degree, when it comes to cashless payments. A lot of businesses were working on Interac or were working on debit. US was one of the countries that was relatively far behind, and I would say that cash was kind of still king in those particular areas. So as this transition started to move forward through time, fast forward maybe 5 years into the future, now you're starting to get more acceptance of digital payments across the entire ecosphere. So you're not only talking about the economy that is being done online or in commercial areas, but also the economy that is including of transactions from person to person. This type of economy is colloquially known as the shadow economy. It's primarily cash-based, but even up to about 5 years ago, this economy has started to transition to other means of payment. In particular, in Canada, when you're talking about the shadow economy, a lot of people are actually now utilizing Interac e-transfers. So now you're able to go Craigslist or any other type of online store and be able to actually meet the person face to face, sit down, open up your phone, and send them a transaction via Interac. In Europe, I believe it's called SEPA debit, a similar situation there, where you can still transact person to person without a cash medium. And this is an interesting trend. And I think really this is now coming to a head with what has been happening with COVID-19 and the virus pandemic in general, as a kind of final nail in the coffin, if you will, for cash in general. I think that there's an interesting trend that might prevail after the fact. But before we get there, Yuri, do you think you can tell the audience more about what you see as Corona has impacted this type of shadow-based economy when it comes to using cash as payment?
Well, I think the most important part here is that a lot of businesses have been shut down, and these were brick and mortar businesses. These businesses often rely on cash payments, and that's why they weren't able to essentially do any business while the shutdown and the lockdown transpired. So they had to rely on online payments only, especially businesses like restaurants that had to switch to deliveries and takeouts only instead of seating people in the restaurants. So people would prefer to pay with a credit card or with another online payment method to get their food, for example. Now, another topic of discussion here is obviously connected directly with the virus itself. As you may know, the cash itself is made of pieces of paper, right? So these pieces of paper are passed along to many different people, and this obviously poses a threat in terms of virus transmission. That's at least that's what people in the establishment say, right? So that could be used as an excuse to further the agenda of banning physical cash from circulation, or at least to phase it out even more, right? Now, I'm not sure how fast this process will go, and I think the events like the coronavirus pandemic actually accelerate the process. But you have to remember that a lot of countries in the world are still pretty much cash-based societies. Russia, for example, has a very high cash-based society and economy. Everybody deals with cash all the time, but it's starting to change the way I see it, because Russian online payments are really, really good and advanced, and you just mentioned Interac in Canada. But in Russia, online banking is so advanced that you can just send people money with a phone number or a card number instantaneously across the country, and the limits are pretty high. It's uh, definitely more than the average user would need, right? So that alone already makes it a lot more efficient to people who need to pay businesses and just send money to friends and family. And they're already choosing to use their smartphone instead of using physical cash, especially when payments are free and instant, right? So in that case, this is real competition to cash, and I think it's valid, right? But at the same time, as you mentioned, there are a lot of places in the world where the cash economy does not only create um, this convenient way of payment because you can just pay peer-to-peer by passing fiat currency, but it also creates a gray economy or a black economy, black market out there, right? And cash, physical cash, obviously is the best means of payment for such a economic activity because it is untraceable. You cannot trace a history of payments. You don't have to give up your identification documents, things like that. So Greece, for example, as far as I know, in Greece, the gray and black market economy amounts to over 30% of the whole economy. So this is huge. This is 30% of economy that the Greek government is not able to tax or track in any way, right? And I think in Russia it's something similar, although as competition is in the form of banks and banking applications coming through right now, it is falling, and I have experienced it myself. I would rather use my phone than just go and pay with physical cash. It's just that more convenient. But as we all know, this opens up a different can of worms, and which is the government surveillance. So, Nick, what do you think will happen if pretty much the whole society switches to these cashless payments? And we won't touch Bitcoin right now. Let's talk about the government issued currency and government mandated online payments.
I think in general, when you're talking about governments and what has been happening with, if you will, the tightening of controls, both from a economic standpoint as well as from a oversight standpoint or a monitoring standpoint as a result of this COVID pandemic, but also beforehand. And when you speak about that with regards to digital payments, it's really, you have to analyze what the end result might well be or what the end goal might be. And as you very keenly mentioned, it has to do with being able to have complete control and oversight over the spending. So for example, when currently you're doing a transaction, say you bought a bicycle, right? And then you're selling that bicycle on Craigslist and you go and you conduct the transaction. Technically, according to the government regulation, what you're supposed to do is you're actually supposed to be able to pay tax from that as well. And that's considered actually double taxation, which, as far as I know, is not something that a lot of people really want to deal with, which is the reason why they conduct this transaction. But as a result of the push for convenience, which is something that you mentioned as well, that's why a lot of people are leaning towards the digital payment side. And where this is really heading, I think, long term, is to be able to have some type of complete awareness, if you will, over the transactional base of the population. And when you have a complete awareness of the transactional base, really what you have is not only just economic control over the population, but you also have a form of reprimand. So, for example, say this similar situation occurs. You're going and you're purchased a bike and now you want to sell it to your neighbor or your friend or somebody you found through an online website. You go and you conduct this transaction. Well, as you go to pull out your phone to pay this particular individual, what will happen, of course, is automatically they will levy the tax on you. So that might be a pain point. But number two, what else is going to happen is this is going to be connected to the surveillance network that's going to be propping up, I would say, around the entire world. How it's going to be coming to light is a little bit of a different topic, so we won't touch on that there. But suffice it to say, there is going to be a social score. Just look at China for kind of the blueprint of where this is going to be going. And if the other individual's social score is not high enough, then you're actually not going to be able to transact, period, which means that now what would be a very typical and basic sale of your property is now restricted by the government, because there's not sufficient enough oversight, if you will, or not, I shouldn't say oversight, but there's not a sufficient enough score on the other individual's side to be able to complete this type of transaction. So what is the ultimate end to something like this? Well, the ultimate end to something like this is to be able to really eliminate free commerce. It's going to be under the guise, again, of very, I would say, borderless type of transactions, because you will be able to do a lot of different types of things that you couldn't do with cash. But these transactions, just like the, I would say, illusion of freedom in North America, will really be something that's actually very tightly and strictly controlled. And by controlling your wallet, what you're really doing is you're controlling the individual's behavior. And that's really the end goal of all of this, to be able to control a mass amount of individuals with the least amount of energy possible. And this can only be done, again, through mass surveillance and being able to have a digital form of currency that is fully trackable and that is fully auditable. So this also goes into other realms, not only if you're talking about personal property, but you're talking about, say, estate planning. It's very possible that in the future, because you have your entire financial history recorded from start to finish, and not only recorded, but also very easily analyzable by either artificial intelligence or other types of machine learning algorithms, which essentially are going to be able to affect the way that you transfer wealth from your generation to the next generation. And this is now beyond generational taxation. This is the, I mean, for lack of a better word, it's enslavement. You're taking all of the energies that you had spent in a particular time, and you are usurping the value of those energies just as a means of being able to provide a transfer of value from you to your family. And going back to the example that I was saying, is that your financial history, as it's being tracked throughout your life, upon that moment of transfer, it could be reviewed in a matter of seconds. And upon that review, it can be deemed or flagged as inadmissible for transfer. And then guess what will happen? It's not just an estate tax. Your entire wealth all of a sudden goes to the government. And there you go. Now you have absolute full control over the population, not only just about where they go and what they do, which the corona pandemic has definitely provided the framework for that, but also in how they spend. And I'm sure, Yuri, as you know, if you control a person's spending, you can very well control the person's interaction. And there's still, I believe, regardless even of this type of future coming upon us, going to be a need for people to transact with one another in a way that is outside of the prying eyes of these economic overlords and watchdogs. I think that as a means of transacting, this is where Bitcoin can become very, very valuable and has the use case more so than it does today. In your opinion, do you think that as this progression towards kind of financial oversight and the debasement of cash payments continues, that Bitcoin can somehow be used along with some other technologies to be able to still transact in a free way in this modern world?
Yes. Thanks for the question. I definitely think that Bitcoin is the light at the end of the tunnel here, and you just described a very Orwellian future, and I think Bitcoin is the countermeasure to that future. And the more people start using Bitcoin by accumulating it first and then using it in the future for various purposes, for payments as well, not just savings, we will see a shift in how these operations are performed from the government side to the private side. And Bitcoin has this ability because, first of all, it is completely decentralized. It is not controlled by any single entity out there, meaning that there is no government control, there is no government oversight. What they can do is they can observe the blockchain just like anybody else can do, because the blockchain itself is open. All the addresses and the amounts are open, and this is what blockchain analytics company attempt to do. But at the same time, there are multiple teams around the world who are working on various solutions to this problem as well, to try to essentially not even mix transactions, but to break the heuristics that the chain analytics companies use to determine where transactions come from and where they go, right? So when you have a solution to this problem, when you break this heuristic, essentially all transactions, they become unreadable to the chain analytics companies. And in that regard, Bitcoin becomes more anonymous and more private. So I think because of that, people will prefer it, because just as you mentioned with a bicycle example or with any other thing that people may sell to each other, uh, it is an infringement on the right of the persons to transact privately. So uh, people just want to do commerce peacefully, and that's why they choose cash. But when cash is not there anymore, Bitcoin comes in, and that's why Bitcoin officially in the white paper is called peer-to-peer electronic cash system, right? And a lot of people confuse this word cash because they think cash is only about payments. They make an argument that cash system means that Bitcoin is invented only for payments like PayPal. It's basically another PayPal, but just decentralized. This is not the case. Cash uh, in this sense means that it is a private way of transacting with people. It is something that is off the books or off the government surveillance machine. So definitely, I think Bitcoin has a great chance of countering the government surveillance attempts and government control attempts, and not just with the underlying protocol of Bitcoin, but with other technologies that are being developed on Bitcoin right now. And this can be the Lightning Network that is being built on top of Bitcoin, which is specifically for payments, for scaling, and it also provides quite a few privacy protections, because now suddenly there is no payment on the blockchain. The payment is on top of the Lightning Network, which does not have the regular addresses on the blockchain and the amounts that you have, right? So it's more of a routing mechanism where your payment can be routed through multiple intermediaries before it reaches the final recipient. And the recipient doesn't know exactly from where the payment came, right? Because the recipient can only see the previous routing entity that sent the payment to the recipient, right? So, and other technologies like the Liquid Network, for example, provide benefits as well in terms of the amounts that people transact with each other. For example, uh, uh, you can send any amount of Bitcoin on the Liquid network to another person, but people will not be able to see. They will be able to browse the Liquid blockchain, but they won't be able to see how much was transacted, because transactions are confidential, so confidential on the Liquid network. And definitely, it's worth mentioning the attempts of various teams around the world, like the Samurai Wallet team and the Wasabi Wallet team, who are working on increasing privacy on the Bitcoin protocol itself. So they are developing wallets that essentially use these coin mixing, coin joining techniques that allow uh, multiple parties to mix their Bitcoins and then send Bitcoin transactions with those coins. This again breaks the heuristic of blockchain analytics companies who rely on very basic understanding of where Bitcoin transactions and amounts come from. So normally they would analyze the blockchain and see that a transaction may have something to do with some dark market, many transactions before that, and somehow they link the current owner of the coins to that transaction in the past, which is obviously incorrect because the coins may have passed through many hands already. This is exactly the case with physical cash, where there's a funny statistic that a lot of $100 bills have traces of cocaine on them, but you wouldn't know because that yours has it, because it's just invisible traces. But nevertheless, you would not make a conclusion that you, who is holding the $100 bill right now, is a cocaine user, right? So this is similar to that, just in the electronic realm.
You know what? That's actually, I think, a really good point about Bitcoin in general, and as a means of replacing cash. There's clearly a lot of technological solutions that can help obfuscate the transactional history, as well as to kind of create a higher level of privacy. So it's definitely a very viable contender, I think, as a replacement for cash. But something that I want to leave off on is more of a theological, or I shouldn't say theological, but more of a, I guess, higher level, higher order type of thought as to why a form of cash is incredibly important to maintaining our freedom, whether it be in the physical sense, which is, as we talked about, being phased out, or whether it be in the digital sense through Bitcoin and layer 2 technologies. And that is the ability to transact from one individual to another in a sovereign, untraceable, and a completely private way, I believe is one of the foundational privileges that humanity has bestowed upon itself with the creation of economics and the creation of a money system in general. I believe that this is one of the key proponents to freedom for the long term, and to actually the creation of not only a better society, but also to one that is able to advance at paces far beyond that of one that is controlled. I think a really good place again to look for the signs of this is the Chinese economy. Because it is so tightly restricted and controlled, you see that people that are able to amass certain amounts of wealth, the first thing that they want to try is to get their money out of the economy. Because what's the point of spending your entire life trying to generate value if then you cannot utilize this value as freely as you originally wanted to change the world, to better your life, to better the lives of people around you? And I feel really that is the biggest key to a cash-based type of system, is the freedom to transact. And without freedom to transact, it's only one small stone away from full-blown totalitarianism, and I think a technocratic fascist state, which is incredibly dangerous. And I do believe that we have a strong fighting chance as a global community, as a technological proponents of Bitcoin, to be able to really stand our ground against what's coming in the future. And it's really important that we keep continuing to fight this fight, that the developers continue to evolve, and that the people, everyday individuals, start to educate themselves about the true value of not only being the owner of your own wealth, but also having the freedom to transact with your wealth in whatever means you see that you would like. So with that, my name is Nick, signing off.
My name is Yuri. Thank you for joining in.